So with that, I will kick us off. Like I said, my name is Eileen Bookestein, the Environmental Education Coordinator here at EGLE. And as part of our EGLE Classroom program, we are offering a webinar series to educators. And today we are talking about MiEJScreen and how we can use that to facilitate place-based, project-based, problem-based learning, which is sometimes also called 3P learning and part of our state's STEM education strategy. So we're really excited to share what we've got with you today. If you joined us for any of our past webinars, this is a very familiar graphic to you by now. Just a quick overview of who we are here at the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy and what we do. So we are made up of a number of different program divisions. These 6 blue boxes are what we would call our program or our regulatory divisions. These are the main programs you think of that protect air, land, water. And these are the programs that we focused on in our last year series. But this year we're focusing on what we call here at EGLE our executive offices. So we have some major offices. Office of Climate and Energy, Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate, Office of the Clean Water Public Advocate, and Office of the Great Lakes. So these are all offices that are doing really big statewide policy level, really big change making work in their respective spaces. And we are excited to showcase some of the work that they've done. So we've talked about some climate and energy topics already. We are going to be doing a little bit more talking about the Great Lakes and about clean water in our May webinar. And today we're focusing in on Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate. And then like any organization, we have lots of support services, which is where my job is located. So look back at the ones we've seen in the past. If any of these topics looked interesting to you, they are all posted on EGLE's YouTube channel. So you can go back and watch our community science, our climate change, or this webinar after the fact. And I'll send out links to those after the webinar is over. So before I hand it off to Kate, I want to just give you a very, very quick couple of things to give you some context around what we are talking about today in our time together. So we're talking about environmental justice, and it's really important that we're all on the same page in terms of what we mean by that term, because some people define it, slightly differently from each other. So the definition that the state of Michigan uses is that environmental justice is the equitable treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, ability, or income, and is critical to the development and application of laws, regulations, and policies that affect the environment, as well as the places people live, work, play, worship, and learn. So Kate's going to talk a lot more about kind of the history of environmental justice and how that, developed in Michigan and how that's applied here. But I wanted to start us out making sure that we're all on the same page with our definition. And I want to just take a quick moment to talk about what does it mean to incorporate environmental justice and science learning. And especially environmental science learning. Those of you who are classroom teachers or who support classroom teachers, you know that our science standards here in Michigan, the next generation science standards, the Michigan science standards, really urge us to engage students in active investigations to make sense of a natural phenomena in the world, and that they are supposed to be analyzing and building solutions to problems. And one of the really wonderful connections between environmental justice and science learning is that when we base those real life investigations on a justice-centered phenomenon, then that can really help to support student learning and around science and engineering practices. So when they take a project and they incorporate that into their classroom and that project supports equity and justice in their own community, it really helps them see that science and engineering is something that is applied and that is connected to other disciplines and other parts of their life, and not just in its own silo. So this graphic comes from a STEM teaching tool from Practice Brief 71 that identifies 7 recommended actions that educators can take to advance equity in science teaching. And a couple things I just want to point out. I'm going to give you the link to this practice brief as well as some others that are really good that help you think about how to incorporate environmental justice topics into your teaching. But some of the things I think are really important to point out here is one is that when you look at environmental justice, as part of your environmental science teaching and learning, that you're really looking at phenomenon that are really meaningful to a student's everyday life. And so it helps make that phenomenon more meaningful, and it helps really connect to their own culture and history and their own ways of knowing. And that's one of the things that we might touch on a little bit in this webinar too, is that, we're looking at data, we're looking at science, but there's many ways to understand and to know your community. And when you take that justice-oriented lens, you're able to try to elevate some other ways of making sense of the world, other ways of that you can learn about your community, and find that knowledge, resides in not just a textbook or not just, in this tool, but knowledge resides in your community and the expertise that's there as well. And so this justice-oriented lens towards environmental education really gives you a springboard to really engage meaningfully in your community with a number of different people. I want to share just a couple of resources that these will be sent out to you afterwards as well, that I really recommend, that I think are really helpful when it comes to incorporating this into your classroom. We today are showing you how to use a tool that can really enhance some of your existing lessons and curriculum. But if you want to go deep and have some curriculum that looks specifically at environmental justice at a little bit more depth, one really excellent tool or set of lessons comes from an organization called EcoRise. They have an introduction to environmental justice curriculum that's a whole series of lessons. There's one that's scaled to grades K through 6 and one to grades 7 through 12. So this is a kind of national level look, US level look at environmental justice, the history of it, what it means, how it's applied, who's been important in the field, what are some things that we're seeing happening. And then if you want a more Michigan-specific curriculum, the University of Michigan Dearborn has a really great program called Environmental Health Research to Action, or ERA. And they have released this year a curriculum called ERA Foundations for grades 6 through 8 that looks at environmental justice, not just from the science perspective, but we're looking at human health, and then we're looking at taking what you find and moving that into action. So both of those curriculum resources are really good. I recommend them. And then if you want some tools to just help support your own knowledge about how to teach about these topics, I have listed out here. Those of you who work with teachers in the classroom are probably familiar with the STEM teaching tools. I will share these all with you afterwards, but there are a number of practice briefs that are very short articles that have just a wealth of information on practical tips for incorporating this. And then the North American Association for Environmental Education has a really incredible collection of resources as well for teaching about justice, but also equity, diversity, and inclusion in a variety of different types of programs, both in the classroom and also non-formal programs. So these are really wonderful things, and you can take the MiEJScreen tool that you're going to learn about today and use it alongside any of these resources. And hopefully what you are about to see here with Kate will help you see how you can supplement some of your existing lessons with this tool to make it more meaningful and more justice and equity focused. So with that, I want to introduce you more formally to Kate Hutchins. Kate Hutchins is the Environmental Justice Project Coordinator in our Office of Environmental Justice. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to her. And she's got an incredible presentation planned for you today. So Kate, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Eileen. Can you all hear me okay, I hope? Eileen went off camera, so okay, good, thank you. All right, thanks all for being here today and for letting me share this time with you. And I am going to attempt to share this window, and hopefully that will show up as well.
It looks great.
Great, thank you very much. All right, yep, so like Eileen said, my name is Kate Hutchins. I've been working as a project coordinator in the Office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate here at EGLE since 2022. And we're going to start off, actually, I hope you didn't all fall asleep yet, because we're going to start off with a little poll just to get a sense of where, because we're going to be using this mapping tool, and it's called MiEJScreen. We're going to be looking at that today, and probably you all knew that, but I want to get a little bit of a sense of where people are with mapping tools and their comfort or experience with using them. So Eileen, are you able to launch that poll for us today? today, right now, in fact.
Yes, poll should be launched. Are people
Okay,
seeing poll?
I see it now.
Live results coming in. Are you seeing the results, Kate? I'm seeing lots
I
of
am.
tinkerers.
Yes, that's good. You know, I feel like that's actually pretty much the target for this particular uh, that I'm pitching this presentation to. So I think that's great. All right, thank you. So um, for those who are watching the recording, maybe, and you won't be able to see the poll, I'm not sure how that works actually. But the other options were I'm a savvy GIS user. I like to tinker with digital mapping tools. I use maps or GPS to navigate, or I don't really use digital maps at all, or other. So those were our options, and it looks like most of our folks are in the tinker uh, slot. Thanks. So I wanted, before we dive into, sorry, did that? Yes, okay. The next slide here. Before we dive into the MiEJScreen, I want to talk a little bit about the office that I work in, the Office of the Environmental Justice, or EJ, Public Advocate. Environmental justice is many syllables, and as much as we love to give it all of that weight, that takes up a lot of time. So I'm going to shorten it tonight to EJ for most of my, and in fact, that's often how we talk about it, is we use EJ. So this is the first office in Michigan's history dedicated to environmental justice, or EJ. It was created by Governor Whitmer in 2019, so we're turning 5 this year. And we work collaboratively across state government to advance environmental justice and equity across Michigan. And I want to introduce you to our team. We are led by Regina Strong. She is the Environmental Justice Public Advocate. That's her title. And then Katie Lambeth is our Environmental Justice and Tribal Liaison. And I am a project coordinator here in the office. I also want to give a little bit of context around the history and background of the environmental justice movement in the United States and here in Michigan, kind of honing in on how we got to this point in time where we have this MiEJScreen that we're using for all sorts of different purposes, but we'll be looking at tonight. And so it kind of, the credit is often given for the kind of birth of the EJ movement to actions taken in Warren County, North Carolina regarding a PCB landfill. PCBs are a known carcinogen. And throughout the 80s, then there was some research that was done. And it's very important to stipulate that the outrage around this situation was that people suspected that this landfill was sited in the way that it was in a predominantly Black community based on assumptions about different ways that that community was or wasn't empowered to push back against that hazardous waste site. So there was some research done through the 1980s, including this landmark study called Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States that came out in 1987 that started to show that there was a significant effect of the of predominantly Black communities, especially, or predominantly Hispanic or Latinx communities, in the way that toxic waste sites were being cited. And located is what I mean when I say cited. In the 90s, we started to get a little bit of federal action around environmental justice. There was the 1991 First People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, where a document called Principles of Environmental Justice was first assembled by that summit. In 1994, President Clinton issued Executive Order 12898, which really was the first time that environmental justice was brought formally into federal government policy. In the 2000s, there was the second National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, and Governor Granholm actually directed the then Department of Environmental Quality to develop an early statewide EJ plan for the state of Michigan. And then in the 2010s, in 2017, the Michigan Environmental Justice Work Group was formed following recommendations from the Flint Water Advisory Task Force and the Flint Water Interagency Coordinating Committee. And I'm going to refer back to that work group in a second. And then Governor Whitmer created this office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate in 2019. And then there's been a few things, even just in the last few years. It's actually been quite a time to be in government work around environmental justice. There's a reason that it's very much an expanding space of work for a lot of different layers of government, levels of government right now. And so my position was just added to the office in 2022 after the office had been around for a couple of years. Anyway, sorry, digression. So in 2020, the state formed the first ever Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. And in 2023, just last year, President Biden signed Executive Order 14096, which was really, it really brought back to the foreground and highlighted and re-emphasized focusing on environmental justice, particularly at the Environmental Protection Agency, but across all different federal agencies as well. And I wanted to put in, this cute little graphic with the circles of the timeline started over again when we got back to the 2020s in this next slide. So I wanted to include, for those of you who work with youth or who are classroom teachers, the 2030s, the next decade is when those students are going to be out there leading change. So I just wanted to think about how we have the future to attend to as we're doing this work. So MiEJScreen, Michigan's environmental justice screening tool, this is a screenshot. We'll go to a little bit of a live tour in a little bit, but I wanted to give you a sense of what this looks like because I'm going to talk about how it was built and how it works. And I want to give you the visual because to dive into the specifics of the visuals can get a little distracting when you're trying to talk about the concepts. So you'll see that the legend here shows that the overall scores are percentile scores. It's very important to keep that in mind, that every census tract has a score from 0 to 100, and it's relative to all of the other census tracts in the state of Michigan. So the blue are the lowest scores, which actually means like the least amount of environmental justice concerns. And the red are the highest scores, which represent the highest level of environmental justice concerns across the state. So the background on this tool, its primary purpose is to examine and map environmental, health, and socioeconomic indicators to identify communities in Michigan that can be disproportionately, or pardon me, that may be disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. And remember I mentioned that work group that had been formed in 2017. So they put out a report with priority recommendations for what the state of Michigan should be doing to address environmental justice. And an environmental justice screening tool, mapping tool, was one of those priority recommendations. And this was developed through collaboration among multiple state agencies. Our office actually coordinates an interagency environmental justice response team. And there was a data and research work group that from among those the agencies in that group. And there was a lot of contributions from multiple state agencies to the development of this tool. And it was released in early 2022 in the current draft form. So what is an EJ screening tool? Why do we use that word screening tool? It displays represents relative environmental and socioeconomic risk factors in communities. And it indicates places where more investigation or even maybe more specific kinds of care may be warranted for environmental and or public health actions. And so one thing that three things that environmental justice screening tools don't do, and specifically MiEJScreen doesn't do these things, is model the overall burden on communities. There are some tools or some layers that get closer to representing this concept, but it also does not model the likelihood of individual health outcomes. And it also is not a diagnostic tool. It's not going to diagnose any particular community health issue. So there are actually quite a lot of different kinds of environmental justice focused maps out there. Some of you may be familiar with some of these. And the shapes and colors of your product may vary, and they tend to be very purpose built. So the reason I kind of headlined with the primary purpose of MiEJScreen is to map and identify communities that may be disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards through those three different, environmental, health, and then socioeconomic indicators. There are different tools that have different purposes. So the Center for Disease Control has their Environmental Justice Index, which is very focused on public health. US EPA's EGLE is similar to MiEJScreen, but it's a federal scale. So every census tract has a score that's relative to all of the different throughout the entire United States. So it's important to keep in mind that not every EJ related map is a screening tool, and that all of these different tools are intended to do different things. So you have to really kind of pay attention to what use you might be putting a particular tool to. And it's important to note that the government's use of these tools is also really expanding. You know, I said we're kind of in a moment where a lot of government work around environmental justice is growing, and the use of these tools has been really expanding along with the technological capacity to leverage them. And so there are a lot of new tools out there that are just coming online. And MiEJScreen is one of not the newest, but also not the oldest. But it's been over the last not so many years that this has really become an important factor in environmental justice work, in government work. But I wanted to also mention that in 1987, our environmental justice forebears were telling the story with a map. So that Toxic Wastes and Race report that I mentioned before, which was produced by advocates and researchers, told their story through the same concept of showing the distribution of different socioeconomic groups of people relative to the distribution of different kinds of environmental hazards, specifically toxic waste sites. So I'm seeing some questions in the chat, which I am very bad at reading simultaneously while I'm speaking. So I want to take a pause and look there and also see if there are folks who have other questions to unmute that they would wish to ask. Eileen, do you have a preference for how to moderate this part?
I can turn on the option to unmute, and you can, while I do that, you can see the first question in the chat is, can EJScreen be used to simulate zip code data used in the Flint water crisis, or is there a better data set to use to support lead crisis, to look into lead crisis?
I am going to have to take that question back. I appreciate that question, and I'm thinking about for one thing, the MiEJScreen operates on a census tract level rather than a zip code level, which is a little tricky for people because nobody knows their well, maybe you know your census tract code number, but I certainly don't where I live. So that is one difference that would be specifically about zip codes, but related to Flint and related to lead in water, I would have to take that question back around the mapping because I am not, I'd have to, I'll take that one back. And by that, I mean, I'm going to check with other people who know about these things that I'm not certain about.
And just so everybody knows too, I always send out, if you've attended to any of these in the past, I always send out a follow-up email where I have all the resources that everybody was talking about during the presentation. And then I also try to address as many questions as we can that we didn't get to during the presentation in that follow-up. So hopefully if Kate can get some feedback, we will include that answer to your question in the follow-up.
Yeah,
we have another question.
Oh, I just thought of something while you were, thank you for giving me a second to think about that, because the other thing I just wanted to say is that there is a blood lead level indicator in incorporated into the MiEJScreen, which I think is the primary way in which lead vulnerability has been incorporated, as well as a lead paint indicator. Sorry, I'm looking at my list of indicators over here. So I think, but again, to that specific question, I think I can come up with a better response if I have a time to check with folks. And then I also see what kinds of socioeconomic factors does MiEJScreen consider to determine percentiles? What a great question. We are definitely going to get to all the different indicators as well as the math that goes into the special sauce. So for those who really want to nerd out and see what all the variables are, I have that list coming up. Is this a tool that will be appropriate for students to use or more appropriate for teachers to use to help provide local issues to students for consideration in place-based learning? That is the fundamental question we're kind of looking at this evening. Thank you for asking that question. I think both. It depends on your students. I have a third grader and he always can like do stuff with technology that I didn't expect him to be able to do. So I'm guessing that there's lots of students out there who would be interested to tinker with some context with the tool itself. But I also think with some guidance from a teacher, and we'll also talk about where it fits in the step-by-step process of place-based and project-based learning. All right, so I think we're going to move on. Thank you for those questions and for prompting to know that we're talking about the right things in a couple of minutes. So, like I said, Eileen asked me to look at this. I really actually like these 6 elements of place-based stewardship education. I should share that. So I'm not an educator by training, but I was a librarian for 10 years and I did a lot of like workshop instruction. So I can appreciate some of the pedagogical nerdiness, if you will. So in looking at what MiEJScreen is best suited to do, my opinion is that it's a really good fit for these first 2 kind of stages of a project concept development. The scanning of the community and the choosing of an issue to look at, examine, investigate. And I actually almost think it fits pretty perfectly in this little arrow, like moving from the scanning of the community to choosing an issue. I think it can really support that. And I'll try to talk a little bit about how. Some of it I think is going to just require you, if you are inclined, especially if you are planning to work with students using this, to doing some playing with the tool yourself to understand how it represents your community and what you think it does and doesn't capture in specific ways of how your students might think about it. So I wanted to ask another poll question, if you'll bear with me. Eileen, are you able to launch that next poll? So the next poll is, when I introduce a new tool or technique to my current batch of students. Oops. Oh no, I missed one. Oh.
Well, we'll start with this one.
Forgive me.
They still have the chance to do this poll. You're going to get 2 polls in a row is what's going to happen.
And forgive me for missing this one. I didn't have it in my notes. People are getting it right though. You didn't know there was going to be a pop quiz.
Yeah. Kate wanted to make sure you were paying attention, but you clearly were. Well done, everybody.
You were. Oh my goodness. Okay. Thanks everybody for sticking with us on our highly produced webinar here.
It's true. Okay, I'm going to close that one. You want me to open the next poll?
Yeah, please. Please, thank you.
This is the one that's relevant to the topic we're talking about right now. There we go.
Okay. So my real question at this moment now is, when I introduce a new tool or technique to my current batch of students or any people you might work with to teach them something, how do they tend to engage with these things? Are they curious about how and why it works right away? They just want to learn how to use it and apply it to the thing that they're going to have to do it for. They want to mess around with it, see what it does for themselves, or all of the above.
You can also choose multiple options
You
if
can.
you want to. Yeah. High-tech poll.
All right, we'll give you another 3 or 4 seconds. All right, so we have a good mix, and that's kind of what I was expecting, because I do think that this is kind of like almost a learning style sort of question. I guess we can close that poll. I don't know. Do I have to X out of it? Is it already closed? Okay. So the reason that I actually am putting this out there is because I also want to share the URL for MiEJScreen in case you're one of those people that just wants to like go mess with it and then come back and watch this recording later to learn about how it's doing what it's doing. But to think about sitting here and listening to someone explain the math is just gonna not be your thing right now. So I wanted to make sure that folks had a chance to, and I should have found a way to put that into the chat just now. I could probably type it.
I'll put it in there for you, Kate.
Okay, all right, thanks. Oh, yay, support. Oh, hey, thanks, Ben. All right, so there's also a link in the chat now. You don't have to go, but if you feel like you really want to listen and do at the same time, please feel free to do that. So please do not let this chart overwhelm you. There is a lot happening on this chart. This is the recipe for MiEJScreen. So what we have here, let's start at the bottom, actually. Every census tract, remember we talked about they're all scored from 0 to 100. And every census tract has a MiEJScreen score. Every census tract also has a subscore for environmental conditions and population characteristics. And through this math, those get combined to be the MiEJScreen score. There is also a percentile for each of these indicators that fall into 4 categories. Under environmental conditions subscore, we have environmental exposure, which is indicators for which we have an understanding of what kinds of exposures people experience relative to what's actually in their environment. And then there's environmental effects where there's maybe unclear or uncertain exposure to people based on this proximity. They tend to be proximity indicators. Sensitive populations, which has to do with particular health concerns, and then socioeconomic factors, different demographic facts about a census tract. So these are all of the indicators, and this is how it all comes together for each of the, you don't have to remember this. Please don't feel like you have to commit this to memory to understand. I hope that people will feel like they'll be able, I just wanted to make sure that the people who need all the math have it in front of them. So there are 26 of these indicators, and each one of these, each one of these has a layer that you can view on MiEJScreen, on the tool, on the map, so that each census tract will have a percentile score for each one of these indicators. So there might be a situation where you actually aren't sure at all what you're going to be looking at because you haven't really kind of thought about it, but you're curious what kinds of factors are happening in your community around, maybe around your school or some other location that you're wanting to investigate. And you can go through and find that place and then turn on and off each one of these layers and then get more details. We'll go into that in a little bit. So this is just a little bit more about how things get represented on the map. You know, like I said, there's, you know, the overall score. Each is ranked 0 to 100, and then there's the subscores, and you can turn on and off each of these subscores, and then you can click on the map and you'll get, I keep promising you're going to be able to click on things. I promise we'll get there. And then this shows the gradient of the subscores, so you can do it for each one of these different categories. There are also, in addition to all those indicator layers and score layers, there are context layers in MiEJScreen. And context layers give more information about the overall environmental justice context, including historical things, emerging issues, other kinds of things that are not part of that indicator list, but do help fill out the story and fill out understanding of what is going on in a community. And they also support some uses beyond that primary purpose that we talked about. Or the two examples that happen to just be the first two that are listed on the MiEJScreen additional EJ context layers is what they're called, is the homeowners loan corporation neighborhood redlining grade map. So this represents a historical policy that has been known as redlining that has contributed to some of our environmental justice concerns. And then there's also a context layer that's called MiEJScreen sum of indicators above 75th percentile. So it's like how many of those 26 indicators is your community in the top 25th percentile of MiEJScreen for all of those indicators. And it shows a rough representation of environmental burdens and how they can accumulate in some communities relative to some others. So it gets close to something that we often talk about in EJ work of cumulative impacts or cumulative burdens, particularly, but it's not a perfect model. So now I'm hoping we can actually go to MiEJScreen together, and these are the things we're going to do. We're going to find a location, perhaps a school. I'm going to walk through this. If you want to just go along for the ride, please do. And then we're going to kind of click around on the surrounding census tracts. And I'm watching the time. We got good time, I think. Turn off a few scores, turn on a few scores, see what the pop-ups say. The pop-ups are actually really where a lot of the value comes in, less so from the whole visual. And you'll understand this when we get there. And then I just wanted to share that all of the layers have their details in the technical report, where the context layers have their item details linked from the list. And that's a little bit tricky to get to, but hopefully. Okay, I'm gonna unshare, or wait, maybe I can, there we go. Can you all see this where it has changed to a browser window?
It looks great.
Okay, thanks. So this is what you'll see if you were to load MiEJScreen right now. The first thing you see is that something is broken, unfortunately. So this says the layer food desert cannot be added to the map. There are some, because we're getting all of these different data sources from many different servers. This one actually, I believe, comes from EPA's EJScreen. Sometimes people change a URL or move somewhere in those other entities that are hosting these geographic information systems might move that or change that. So we're in the process of fixing that. So I apologize for that initial barrier. But this is what you see when it loads, and I'm going to click OK. And then we get the whole state here. And I was yesterday years old when I learned that I could move this little legend, which I think is very helpful in case you're trying to look at a particular part of the map. So we see our overall statewide relative scores. And for example, I saw that there was someone registered from Dearborn Public Schools, and our office actually connects quite often with folks who work around a particular school in that district. And so I'm just going to use that as my example this evening. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So what you can do, sorry, I just did that instead of talking you through it. I apologize. Up here in this search bar, you can look for a place. And then we're here in this, and it shows that your little dot where your place is. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm zooming in with my scroll wheel. You can also use the plus and minus arrows over here. So now I'm just looking at the MiEJScreen score layer with my school. So if I click on this, then I get lots of information here I can see the overall score. I can see the environmental conditions percentile. I can see the population characteristics percentile. I can see the subscores for those 4 different categories. And then I'm going to close my pop-up, and then we're going to look at the layers list. So I'm going to go up here to this thing that looks like 3 stacked layers on top of each other. That's our layers list. And here you can see right now all we have on is MiEJScreen overall score. And I can turn that off, poof, it goes away. Turn it back on, it comes back. Or I can turn on a different layer. And then if I click on that same census tract, then I'll see, oh, well, I thought I was going to see something else there. What if I click on this one? Environmental conditions. There we go. If I go to just one of these categories where they're numbered here, 1, 2, then I can see the percentiles for each of those indicators that are within that category. So overall percentile for exposure to environmental conditions is 96. And then it has these other percentiles for these different indicators. So we're going to stay in this same spot. One thing I like to do, if you're here with me on the tour still, is I'm going to actually change my base map. The default is this really light gray. I find it kind of hard to understand where I am in the universe looking at that. So I like to either change it to the street view, which is a little bit more like a Google Maps kind of view, or sometimes even the imagery with labels satellite view. Because one thing, well, we'll get to in a little bit to what that helps us reveal. So that's our layers, and then we got our base map, and now let's look at the context layers. So we can look at it without any data on there, or we can just put up our standard MiEJScreen overall score. And then I'm going to go to the context layers, and I'm just going to show a couple that we just talked about. So this is what that historical redlining map looks like. And then you'll see that when you add a layer, it shows up on your legend here. So it shows what the different colors and symbology means. And so then we can turn that one off. And then, oh, this one is harder to see with MiEJScreen overall score on. Some of these ones that are these color gradients across the census tract do make it a little bit tricky to see when you have multiple layers on. So if we look at this same census tract, it shows that 18 out of the 26 indicators for this census tract are above the 75th percentile. So that's quite a few indicators that are that brings some concern for a cumulative burden for this community. But you can also look at the different census tracts around. One thing that you'll notice that you can see with the satellite view better than if you have the other view is that this whole census tract is in fact the Ford River Rouge plant. And that is right across the street. There's also a couple of other things that we'll see in a second, a couple of their facilities on this same site. So you can't notice the scale of these kinds of sites to the same degree through some of the other data as you can with the satellite view. Was there anything else I was going to look at? Oh, I wanted to show how you can see where the different context layer details come from. So, for example, it says sites. This is also difficult to see. I'm going to change my base map back really quickly. So I just went up here to the squares. These all kind of look the same. So you have to kind of hover and then it'll give you the name of what it actually is. So I'm going to change back to that street view, or I mean, sorry, the light gray, maybe the street view. And then I'm looking at this context layer and I say sites of environmental contamination, part 201. And I say, I don't know what part 201 means. That's that is part 201 of the environmental protection of Michigan's state legislation that indicates the regulations and all of those things. So you can get all those details if you go to these 3 dots, and then the way that this works is a little bit tricky. So then you have to scroll down and you can go to description, and then that's going to take you to something that's maybe not very illuminating, actually. This one's not great. Let's try a different one. Some of these are going to be less self-explanatory, unfortunately, but you can always call us or email us and ask us. I should have put my email in the slides. I'll put it in the chat. What about this one? This is where you see that I'm doing the live show. Not perfectly rehearsed. Okay, so this has a lot of detail about what this layer represents. So that's good. That's a good example. That's what I wanted. So for those who really feel like you want to, and this is sometimes where you can find out, say your students notice that, oh, there's a hot spot for something here, or what is this thing? And they can look at the layer, or they can, are there any PFAS sites around here? No legend. Oh, I didn't turn it on. That's why. Oh, we don't know what that is. So then we can look here, 3 dots, show item details, and then it'll load that information. And then your students could learn some things that they didn't know about the context of where that information came from. And it sometimes even says for more details, you can go here. So that's where it becomes kind of a pathway to exploring and finding more information. I next want to go into looking at a couple of topics. So that's kind of how you can explore around the place. There's more that we could do. We could do this kind of all night. I certainly could. This is one of those things that I can spend forever looking at and just digging into different interesting things about it. But remember we talked about the pop-ups. That's what this means. When I say the pop-ups, I mean these little windows that pop up when you click on a particular census tract. And sometimes you'll notice like this, you know, I mentioned that tract that has the Ford Rouge plant. Part of why that feels like such a low score relative to all the environmental situations around it is that no one lives there. This tract has 0 people. So sometimes there can be, that is true also for this Zug Island census tract, where there is a lot of environmental effects, but there's no residents of that tract to be exposed from a census tract perspective. Okay. I wanted to look at one sort of topic, I guess, and we'll start with, and this is, again, I kind of don't recommend using MiEJScreen in this way for it to look at a topic, but if you already know, like, oh, the people I work with or the students I work with are really, maybe there's a lot of asthma concern in your community, in your school, maybe. I know that can really be true for a lot of schools. So we can go to this, that's one of our sensitive population indicators. And so we can see where is our neighborhood for our school or our location relative to the rest of the state. So this census tract has a percentile of 77. And then it explains a little bit in this pop-up here about what that means. So it's spatially modeled. So there's a computer model that gives a score to the census tract. Age adjusted, that part I'm going to have to look up. I'm not certain about that. But it's the rate of emergency department visits for asthma per 10,000 people. So it might not it might be representing something that might not be exactly what you were thinking when you saw that asthma as an indicator. So it's good to look at what the details are of what's being represented in that particular layer. So one other thing that might be of interest, okay, so we know asthma is a concern for our student community. So maybe we want to look at what are I can go back to my context layers, and maybe I want to see, oh yeah, what are all the sites in our area? Are there sites in our area that have produced air pollution that have to report to the EPA? There are. Okay, so now I can see that. And this is another situation where it's kind of helpful to have this more descriptive base layer on, because if I were to click on this dot, that tells me about the steelworks, and this dot tells me about the Rouge plant, but that dot only tells me that there is an address there. That's what that dot represents, but it doesn't necessarily indicate the scale. So it's helpful to have this kind of background on when you're looking at these kinds of pieces. So that's how you might go into looking at more like a topic focus. I was going to talk a little bit about another things, but I think we don't really have time for that. I think I might have blown through some of that time. So I'm going to take down, well, first, hold on, let me check my, oh, good. That just did it for me. So, oh, right. The one last thing I did really want to indicate, though, is for folks who would actually really just like a handout, but they're interested in using environmental justice data or screening tools or maps and those kinds of things, but they would like to have a handout to give to their students and to talk through together. I've got you covered, or the EPA has you covered, EPA EJScreen. So I'm going to walk through this one thing very quickly. So I will get the URL to you for this. I can put it, actually, I can copy and paste that. I can do that. That's EJScreen. And if you go to this, it loads on a screen that looks very similar to my EJScreen. So we're in a different environment now. This is EPA's EJScreen. And I can go to, it'll start here, but I can change to this reports. I can put in that same location. And then I can use this drop a pin on that spot. And then I'll name it Salina School. And then I want to click on this EJScreen Community Report. And then it's going to load this beautiful thing that we wish we had for our tool someday that gives you all of this different information. So one of the things that is unique in this community is the distribution of language speakers. So one thing we do when one thing we recently had an opportunity to do is actually simultaneous translation for a community learning session around air quality into both Arabic and Spanish simultaneously for that meeting that was hosted at Salina School, because we knew that from the data we were able to access. And there's lots of other interesting things about this tool that I will not dig into, but I just wanted to make sure that you all had access to that information, because sometimes that's the cleanest way, the tidiest way to look at this kind of information with students.
Kate,
All
there's
right.
a couple of questions. Oh,
yes.
That was good timing. One question was about the additional information, the little 3 dots thing. Is that only available in the context layers? Because when you click on the little 3 dots on the layer list, we don't get that option.
Yes, because all of that information, thank you for asking that question. All of that information is in this. If you're in the screening tool, there's a link up here that says technical report. And all of that data and more all that background information about that source data all lives in this document. So it is not referenced in the same way in the live tool. And then I see another question about flooding. Yeah, so
We knew that question was coming.
Yep. And there's when we launched the tool, there was not a good layer to represent that variable. There has since been the development of a few different, you mentioned the FEMA. FEMA has mapping tools that of their own that you are welcome to go explore. I think I probably have links to a couple of those. But we are working on incorporating that data into MiEJScreen. We just didn't have it available at go time when this was released. Are there other questions? We have 2 more minutes, and I have more slides that I could walk through, but probably not actually.
I'm going to drop the the layer you asked about for FEMA. They do have a mapper. So there's FEMA's National Flood Hazard layer if you're interested in looking into that. One thing I've noticed with that layer is that they haven't, it seems like maybe they haven't fully digitized all of their flood data. And so
That's part of it.
watch out for that. And that shows up. I've worked with some teachers who've used the White House's climate resilience planning tool, climate mapping for resilience and adaptation. There's a really cool tool that teachers can use to look at risks in their own community there too. And sometimes it throws off the vulnerability rating for flooding in relation to climate change because the FEMA flood map that is the base for it is incomplete. So it's always important. I really appreciate the questions about like the technical background and like the information about the data, because that's really important for your students to understand that whole data literacy piece of, where is this data coming from? What does it actually tell us and not tell us? And how do I know if the data is complete or not complete? So I'd encourage you to have your students go through that same process of looking at where data is coming from and thinking about that.
Agree.
Yeah. Any other questions on our last few minutes? Our student worker, Ben, we'll have to put him on digitizing the rest of the FEMA flood maps here in Michigan. That sounds like a good job.
There is data coming. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. It's coming. It's just not, we just haven't flipped the switch to get it in there yet.
Yeah. Well, if you have further questions, feel free to put them in the chat or send me an email later. Kate, if you don't mind putting your email in the chat,
Yes,
people
thank you.
can send questions to you. And that'll be in the follow-up information as well. You'll have the contact information. Stay tuned. Our next webinar will be on May 7, looking at educating students for Great Lakes literacy. So we're going to be previewing Great Lakes and Freshwater Week and also celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is this year as well. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you attending today, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions and or if you need like further EJ screening tutorials. We're happy to do this again, taking requests. But we're happy you're here, and let us know how you're using the tool too. We'd love to hear that and how we can support that.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody, for your time this evening.
Thanks so much.
Take care.